So as Carrie mentioned, I'm Zoe Donaldson. I'm a neuroscientist at Columbia University Medical Center, and I'm also the scientist that answered the call when 1-800-CALL-A-SCIENTIST called. So what I wanted to do today was just take you through what BJ and I discussed when he was working on the film, because where he started and where he ended wound up being a very different place. So Stephen Hawking wrote a famous book, Brief History of Time, and he was advised that for every equation he put in the book, he would lose half of his audience. And so he stuck with one equation, Einstein's E = mc squared. And I have found the same to largely be true when I show molecular structures. And so tonight I'm only going to show you one molecular structure. This is the molecular structure of a hormone called oxytocin. And this has been in the popular press a lot lately. But about 10 years ago, the only reason that you would have known about this particular hormone is if your coming soon didn't come soon enough. So a synthetic version of this hormone is actually used to induce labor in women that are beyond their due date. But there's actually a lot of biology that's been done, and all of it suggests that this oxytocin hormone has a coordinated role in reproduction. So not only does it induce labor, it's also involved in the release of breast milk. And it coordinates the behaviors that go along with these physiological aspects of reproduction. And this is most profoundly observed in rats. So if you're a female rat and you've never been pregnant and someone gives you a pup, you're probably going to kick it away. It's sort of like a gross little thing, right? But once you get pregnant, some sort of switch turns in your brain. And oxytocin is part of a chemical cocktail in your brain that causes that switch to happen. And that switch to wanting to be maternal, to wanting to take care of pups, is profound, because female rats will prefer to take care of pups rather than take cocaine. And they'll even keep taking care of pups until they have a mountain of pups they couldn't possibly care for on their own. And one of the really cool things about this particular hormone is that it essentially does the same thing in pretty much every species we've ever looked at. So yes, it's involved in giving birth in humans, but if you give it to a snail, they lay eggs. And not only is it involved in sort of the end point of reproduction, it also helps you get there. So tonight we're going to see some films. This one's actually a pornographic film. These are microscopic roundworms that live in your compost, and what you're seeing here is that they have essentially one move. Slither up, slither back down, slither up again. If you block oxytocin in these guys, it severely inhibits that one move, and they have a lot of trouble copulating. Now, anytime that you have a molecule that's so prolific, it also creates opportunities for exploitation. And so that's exactly what this creature here has done. So this is a cone snail, and it's famous for having poison darts. And one of the elements of its poison is actually a molecule that's very similar to oxytocin. And so if we purify that in the lab and we put it into a leech, then your presentation just goes away. But actually what it does is it makes the leech do this. And I know you guys probably haven't spent a lot of time looking at leeches, but their typical behavior is just to sit there. The only other time that they do this behavior is when they're mating. And so this has got to be pretty distracting if you're a prey that's been injected with this venom. So I want to go back to rats, because I think this is really where the money's at. This is sort of what hatched an entire field of human research, right? So oxytocin is facilitating these amazingly strong bonds between mother rats and her pups. And it seems to do this also in sheep, maybe in humans. And so this led to a series of scientists, myself included, to ask the question of whether or not this molecule might be important for other types of bonds in our lives, including pair bonds, or what we might call falling in love. Now, pair bonding, which is a human ability, is incredibly rare in mammals. So only about 5% of mammals actually have this ability. But one of the other mammals that can do it is this species here. They're called prairie voles. And it turns out, somewhat unsurprisingly, that oxytocin is just as important for the bond between male and female prairie voles as it is between mothers and their offspring. So anytime that you study monogamy, this gets picked up by the popular press, and in our case, we've also inspired a series of self-help books like this one. So this promises you 6 steps to passionate, plentiful, and monogamous sex, presumably in an underground burrow. And so it's easy to anthropomorphize, right? We want to know, what is this actually doing in humans? And there was this watershed moment about 10 years ago where this paper with a very simple title came out. Oxytocin increases trust in humans. And what they did is they used this nasal spray that contained oxytocin, and they found that when people inhale it, they're more willing to entrust money to strangers. I don't know if this is a good thing, but it led to a whole series of studies then. So it turns out oxytocin makes you better at inferring someone's emotional state based on their facial expressions. If you're a man who's in a relationship, it makes you stand farther away from attractive single women, but it doesn't do that if you're not in a relationship, which the authors argue is one mechanism for supporting monogamy. And then in a paper published earlier this year, it's been suggested that maybe the reason that we love our pets so much is that when we look into their eyes, we get a nice little spritz of oxytocin, and so do our pets. And so this has led to all kinds of salacious headlines, which are tremendously fun and tremendously frustrating if you're a scientist. But it's also incredibly reductionistic and probably wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because oxytocin actually has a dark side as well. So while it promotes bonds, it really only promotes bonds in the context of existing group structures. And it also enhances the isolation of people who are not part of a group. It can also increase envy in certain situations, and it's been noted to increase feelings of schadenfreude. So this is not a simple hug hormone, this is not a feel-good cuddle hormone, but what is it actually doing? And so the way that I like to think about it when we study it in my lab is that maybe what it's doing is it's taking the social content of a situation and it's acting like a booster. So when you have a good social situation, that's great. It helps to reinforce the trust and the bonds between individuals. But when you have a negative social situation, it's increasing the impact of the traumatic aspects of that social situation. So these are things like bullying, etc. So why do we care? Well, this is where the science funding comes in, right? This is what I put in my grants. We care because autism. 1 in 65 children is now diagnosed with autism, and there's essentially nothing we can do from a therapeutic perspective. But there is one paper that came out earlier this year that suggests that maybe giving children intranasal oxytocin helps them with the social symptoms of autism. So this is essentially not being able to infer emotional states of others, a lack of empathy, inappropriate social display. But this only had 30 kids in it. And since then, multiple studies have come out with extremely mixed results. Sometimes no effect, sometimes an enhancement of social anxiety symptoms. And so this is problematic because if you're a parent and you're desperate for something to help your children, then you go to Amazon, you buy oxytocin off the web, and there's no regulation of this, right? So who knows what's in this bottle? And indeed, this particular item here was tested in an independent laboratory, and it essentially contains tap water. Let's hope that's the worst that it contains, right? But even if that wasn't the case, even if it was highly regulated, if you give kids oxytocin, then great. Maybe it really helps if they suddenly are in a situation that's a social learning situation where it's positive and they're really getting a lot out of it. But if their next interaction, their next social interaction is a traumatic one, then you could be doing a lot more harm than good. And so this is one of the few times that I agree with Dr. Oz, the man who told you that green coffee bean extract will make you skinny, when he says that we're not ready for off-label oxytocin use for autism yet. So as you can see, you can take something simple like oxytocin, which makes you give birth, and there's a lot more to the story. There's subtlety and there's nuance. And I'm so happy to have been part of this story, in large part because I feel like BJ really embraced that subtlety and nuance. And I really hope that you enjoy the film as much as I've enjoyed working on it.